All right, it looks like we can go ahead and get started. Hello again, everyone. My name is Kira Sobers, and I am the Media Digitization Manager at the Smithsonian Institution Archives, part of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, where we collect, preserve, and share the history of the Smithsonian Institution. On behalf of the archives, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program and the fifth installment in the Smithsonian 175th Film Fest Films from the Smithsonian Institution Archives. Before we get started, I want to gratefully acknowledge the Piscataway people on whose ancestral homelands I live, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here. I encourage everyone to learn more about the historic and current Native communities in the area that you call home through local museums and centers, as well as the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. And now for a few details about how this will work. The chat box is where we'll be communicating with you throughout the program and where we'll post links as they come up in the discussion. If you're having technical problems, please send a private chat to either myself, Kira Sobers, or Emily Neckrish, my co-coordinator today, and we'll try to help you out. If you have any questions throughout the program, we encourage you to put them in the Q&A box and we will answer them towards the end. We hope you will join us next month for the sixth installment in our Film Fest on January 28th from 12 to 1 p.m. We will be screening Putting Triceratops Together Again. In the short videos in this series, the museum's paleontology staff discussed various parts of their work to restore, maintain, and understand the Triceratops mount displayed in the Dinosaur Hall of the National Museum of Natural History. Following the film, we'll sit down for a conversation with fossil preparator Steve Jabo, one of the stars of the 2001 series, preparator Michelle Pinsdorf, and Fossil Lab volunteer Peter Finkel. For today's presentation, Dr. Melissa Songer will give a brief presentation on the history of the panda program at the National Zoological Park, followed by a screening of two films, one from when the pandas first arrived at the zoo in the early 70s, and one from when Tyshawn was having his cub exams in 2005. After the films, Hannah Byrne will interview Dr. Songer and Lori Thompson on their work. Hannah Byrne is a historian working in the Institutional History Division in the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. She helps manage the Smithsonian Oral History Program and conducts research on the history of the Smithsonian, provides reference for researchers, and works on public projects related to the history of the institution. She holds a master's degree in public history from American University. Dr. Melissa Songer is a conservation biologist leading international conservation programs at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute and National Zoo, among them the Giant Panda Conservation and Capacity Building Program in China, the Smithsonian Myanmar Biodiversity Initiative, the reintroduction of Skintmar horned oryx in Chad, and the restoration of the Przewalski's horse populations in China and Mongolia. Her research integrates ecological fieldwork, remote sensing, and animal tracking with community-based conservation efforts to restore and sustain conservation-dependent species in the wild. Lori Thompson is the assistant curator of giant pandas at the Smithsonian's National Zoological Park and has worked with pandas for 27 years. She's responsible for the management of the pandas, including daily care, training, research, breeding, and enrichment. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Songer.
It's telling me I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. Can you guys hear me?
Try it now.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Let me get my show going here. You see anything?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you for your patience. We actually did rehearse this and had this all worked out. It's always something. So anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all here tonight. I want to give a brief overview, and that's challenging because, as you've heard, we have a 50-year history with giant pandas. And I'm going to talk a bit about the history, but mostly about the research and capacity building efforts we have going on. And hopefully I am going to be able to forward slides. Yay. Okay. So SCBI and the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute and the National Zoo have one of the longest histories with giant pandas outside of China, if not the longest. Dates back to 1972. And that is when Chairman Mao gave a pair of pandas to Richard Nixon as a diplomatic gift. At that point, we didn't have an agreement. There was just a gift of the pandas. And that was obviously a really big deal. And we began at that point, there was several attempts for reproduction, and Qinling and Qinling had 5 offspring, but none really survived for very long. It was in 2000 then that we had the arrival of Meishong and Shenzhen. And this was an agreement that we had for 10 years, and we've had extended it 3 times now, and we have them for another about 2 more years. So in 2005, of course, we had Taishan was born and stayed with us for 5 years before returning to Wolong. And then in 2013, Bao Bao was born, returned in 2017. And now, of course, we have Xiao Qi. We had the birth of twins in 2015. One survived and was officially named Bei by the First Lady of both the US and of China. So that was quite an honor. Madame Peng also joined, and Bei went back to Wolong in 2019. Each year, because of our agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we spend about $250,000 in addition to our payment for the pandas. We have research and capacity building programs in China. And this is, in the beginning, we focused really on 2 priorities. That was in the wild, to understand and protect giant panda ecology and habitat and associated species in China, and then also maintaining a viable, healthy giant panda population in nature and in captivity. In the 1990s, even before we received Mei and Shenzhen, having babies under human care was still very rare, even in China, even though they had a lot of moms to work with. And so a lot of the work then was about trying to improve the health of the captive pandas and figuring out the reproductive timing. So National Zoo scientists were really key in solving those challenges. And our scientists led the first biomedical survey, which included half of China's giant pandas. And it included many disciplines, a lot of data. That was all published in 2006. Our scientists also made important advances to improve reproductive success, pinpointing the timing of breeding through monitoring estrus and ovulation was really key in improving successful reproduction. We also had important roles in improving artificial insemination techniques. So these improvements not only bolstered the captive population, but also reduced pressure on wild populations. So in this graph, you can see the red line that is showing the total number of captive animals through the years, starting in 1980. And you can see this yellow line is showing the number of wild boar animals that were moved into captivity. So you can see that was pretty high in 1980 because they really weren't having success with the captive population. But as they have more success, you can see with the green line, increasing number of babies every year, their pressure for having wild caught animals in facilities went down. And a graph ends in 2004, but that was 166 pandas in the wild. There are now, or in the breeding centers, is now nearly 600. So because of this, breeding centers and the 2 main breeding centers in China have actually more pandas than they can handle, and they are starting to release captive-born pandas into the wild. So it's kind of come full circle now. So building on the results from the Biomedical Survey, the National Zoo began a broad capacity building program that includes formal training, mentorships, fellowships to help China build and grow a healthy captive population. What are the critical skills to improve Reproductive management is through endocrinology training and mentoring, training for diagnosing diseases and monitoring health, preventative medicine and parasites and viruses, proving diets, dental health, as well as record keeping. We also began annual workshops to review the population and to make breeding recommendations. This is really important for maintaining genetic diversity in the remaining pandas. So National Zoo scientists were really critical to solving this challenge, which now is something that goes on every year. We also have worked with students in Shanghai and Beijing Zoo to improve exhibits. And in 2000, we asked what capacity building priorities there were in China. And the '1 request was for learning how to use GIS and manage wildlife and nature reserves. So I led the first training in Wolong in 2001, and we had over 50 people joining the training. So we started to do this every year. We've trained over 600 professionals, including staff from 55 reserves, 15 universities, and many Chinese instructors as well. Bill McShay has trained staff in over 30 reserves in monitoring pandas and wildlife through camera and sign surveys. And then in addition to formal training, we've done a lot of mentoring both in China and in the US. We've advised and mentored many PhD and master students, mostly Chinese nationals, and also supported and mentored postdoc fellows. We've worked with zoo professionals, both in the US and in China. And so I'm going to switch gears now and focus mainly on research that is related to pandas in the wild. And I want to mention too, there's a lot of faces you've seen been flashing up. I don't have time to mention every name, so please take note. There's a lot of people represented, and even this isn't even a fraction of the people that you're seeing on the screens. Our main focus has been on habitat, how to restore it, how to improve connectivity, studying other species it supports, and assessing key threats to pandas, such as climate change. So over 20 years, our work's evolved in response to opportunities and changing threats. So I'm going to try to kind of power through some of our major wild panda population projects. Initially, we started working in reserves just to get baseline data, and we established monitoring through camera trapping, vegetation, climate surveys, and mini reserves. And so we trained teams of protected area staff and grad students to work together. And just to show you some of the fun highlights, of course, first time we got a panda was pretty exciting. And through the years, and later we added video. So we can actually see some movement here, which is very exciting for us. The young one. And more interesting behaviors. Here you can see some scent marking. Siberian weasel, there are a lot of other species, and it's a good reminder when we look at these camera traps that this is a really great way to support other species. This is a black bear species. It's also vulnerable, just like the giant panda. We have a critically endangered Indian Chinese leopard who we captured on camera. Takin is very pleased with himself. So it just gives you an idea of some of the other wildlife that share the space. Bill McShay and his partners have collected over 30,000 camera trap nights at 950 locations. And all this data is available online through emammal.si.edu. One of the most immediate and pressing threats to giant pandas in the wild is, of course, loss of habitat. One of our projects is about developing strategies for expanding the return of pandas to areas that have been logged. And we began by planting bamboo in recently logged sites in new protected areas and areas where pandas had never been detected. But based on our research, we thought they would be good habitat. So we planted a lot of bamboo in different patterns, and we began in 2015. And by the end of 2018, we were really excited to have pandas show up in our restored plots. They left us this very strong evidence here, a big steaming pile. That was pretty exciting to see. So now we're working to increase the number of plots and treatments to figure out what best strategies for scaling up this restoration. In the longer term, one of the looming threats we predict is climate change. And we expect pandas to be more vulnerable due to their habitat specialization and other life history traits. Changyu Huang and I have spent a lot of time modeling impacts to habitat. And depending on which scenario and model you use, we predict they could lose from 40 to 80% of their habitat. So it's really important to start thinking about where the climate refugia would be for pandas. For many years, we were modeling the impact just based on existing data. But just before the shutdown, we began experimental studies in Wolong Nature Reserve to learn how bamboo growth changes with temperature increases. So basically, we've set up these little greenhouses where we can manipulate the temperature to higher levels and actually observe what it's doing to bamboo. So these results potentially can greatly improve our predictions for impacts of climate change. A couple more recent projects evaluating the risk of disease transmission from domestic dogs. In 2014, there were 4 giant pandas in captivity. And in 2014, due to infection by canine distemper virus. And so we wanted to know what potential impact there was in the wild. So testing dogs that live or in villages near protected areas, testing them for disease, and then learning more about where they're going, how much they may be overlapping with wildlife. So it actually tracked 23 dogs and found that they're going up to 5 kilometers inside the nature reserves. So as potential carriers of disease to pandas and other wildlife, this work kind of helps us better understand and mitigate those risks. In the past 5 years, we've also become involved in capacity building for monitoring pandas after release with the Chengdu research base to be able to follow them and monitor their movements in the wild. And of course, according to our Smithsonian mission, we're working to diffuse the knowledge we're gaining. So we've trained over 1,500 wildlife professionals and students in China thus far. We've really built a cadre of field biologists, technicians, scientists, veterinarians. We've had over 110 scientific publications related to our giant panda research. So that includes 5 books, 22 book chapters, and over 80 scientific articles. Many of the manuals that we create for our trainings, we do have translated into Chinese and are available for continued use. We also have worked together with partners in China. Together with those partners, we've done more research and capacity building really than any other international zoo to support giant pandas. So one other thing I wanted to add, this has been focused on research and capacity building in China, but I just want to mention that we have the best care and husbandry, veterinary care for giant pandas. And I think, Xiaoqiji is really the perfect example and evidence of that, being to have Mei Shang reproducing at age 21. There are many pandas known to reproduce at that age. And I think just the care and all the love that goes to these pandas really is shown through that. So to wrap up, I want to point out our giant panda program is really an excellent example of what's possible when we work with partners, when we're really committed for the long term, what we can do when we have this consistent annual support for research and capacity building. And there really isn't another species where we're really mandated to work on their conservation in this way, and it's made a big difference. I think it also shows what we can do together in terms of we have such a wide range of experience from husbandry and care to treatment, reproduction, and ecology. At the National Zoo and SCBI, we're really one of the few places that are really focusing on the wild and the captive population in this way. So I think it's an opportunity to take this holistic approach over 50 years, really shows the power of the panda. And it's just exciting to think about the next phase and what we can do together. So anyway, thank you. Stop sharing.
Also, I forgot to mention that this first set of video clips is silent. So it's not your computers, it's the video. There is no sound here.
He's being very good. You got the touch, Kathy. Oh, for now. It just takes a minute.
Good, yeah. There you go.
Oh, listen to the noise. Okay.
Shake it. 14.8.
15.5. 14.8 is what I was going to take. Oh, see, 14.8.
Shake.
Yes. 15.5. That's me.
15.5 on the nose. All right.
14.1 to 15.5.
Would like you to put him on forward and get a picture. Let me get just one more.
For these exams, we have so many goals here. We have to do photography for our media.
So there he
Let's
is.
go, Kathy.
15.5.
Down here.
Yeah.
This one, this one.
Scale.
You're fine. It's fine. So he stays on the piano. Look at him go.
He's moving. Jim, you take motion. Huh? So this camera, motion. 15 seconds.
If I can, I
Can.
don't know that. He is used to flash, there's no question.
We're going to also, Kathy, try him on the scale without the bend.
I just got the chart for you. You're all set.
Oh, now he's cheating, so he's got one foot off.
Pretty sharp, too.
Put them on again.
You need to face this way.
Face up.
Face me.
Hi, sweetie.
Posing there.
That's the first time I've seen his belly after that.
Yeah, I'll try and squeeze that in.
I'll start.
It's fuzzy, so I guess I'd like to remember him before.
Yeah. What we can do is I'll start making it. Take the family.
Yeah.
Maybe for the last.
Do the stimulation. Okay, let's go ahead.
Still sleeping.
Okay. You ready? Wow.
What is this?
17.1/2, 17.2, we'll call it.
Yeah.
He's huge.
So that's almost 2 pounds since his last exam 2 days ago, just under 2 pounds.
Look this way.
This is also one of the few times where we can get photographs of him without glass, so to try and take advantage of that.
Can the mother tell that you touched him?
Yes, she can smell. It doesn't bother her. We're part of her day-to-day life. She knows all of us. She's familiar with our smells. We do wear the gloves and the gowns and the boot covers as a precaution until he's fully vaccinated.
It might be done, Jesse.
Well, he's getting his 4th today, and then his rabies.
Next exam will be the rabies.
So 10 more days, he'll get his last vaccination, and then we'll wait a period of time.
Suzanne, that photo works really well,
right.
what she just did with her.
All right.
You got it.
Actually, it's maybe 45. Oh, I know. That might be,
You wanna try it?
This might be good. Why don't you get Carlos doing respiration, and I'll do.
We have to get a photograph for a
Can I actually
special
move this? Can I
request.
move
Yes.
this? Can you just put this on the car? Can you do one more, Carlos, when you get between?
I did you. Both in front.
He's being very good.
Yeah, there's premolars coming in.
Now, because I talked about him, he's being a very good boy. You want to try the belly first? You want to try that? Just to see.
I'll hold him while you do that.
Next exam.
Is the bed a hit? $53. Not for long.
This might be a good time to try another respiration too, just for her. I got
48.
Are you okay?
49. Okay. Try this
Let me
one.
try a respiration too.
Can you stand in between the two?
Maybe you can hold him.
Or
I'll just do a.
above Suzanne.
Hey, where are you going?
Too many hands.
Is that comfy?
41.
Oh, yeah.
I need you guys tighter. Tighter, like Suzanne, you're between, I don't know, you're between.
One more.
I'm gonna.
All right, Mel and Lori, I think after those incredibly cute videos, we can
Tough act
turn
to
to a few
follow.
questions to learn a little bit more. So hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Byrne, and I think let's just go ahead and get started. Thank you both so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us here tonight. Can we start off and you both tell us a little bit about yourselves and your roles?
Lori, why don't you go? I'm talking a lot.
Okay. So my name is Laurie Thompson, and I am the assistant curator of the giant pandas. And my role is pretty much everything. I do the day-to-day care of the pandas, the feeding, the cleaning, all that good stuff. But I also manage the kind of the day-to-day activities of the pandas. I work with nutrition on their diets. I schedule veterinary exams, things like that. And then I work with the curator when it's time for breeding and birth. And, we work together to kind of manage that whole process, which is obviously a very big deal.
Mel?
Yeah, as mentioned, I'm a conservation biologist, and that can mean a lot of different things. But the key part of that is about using research towards saving species and habitats. So, my tagline is developing science-based solutions for restoring endangered species in their ecosystems. So when it comes to the giant panda, my focus has been on analyzing their movements, their habitat needs, dynamics with other species, and assessing habitat threats like deforestation, climate change. It's important that we understand as much as we can about their ecology and what they need to survive to design better protection scenarios and figure out how to better connect their habitat. It's important to note that whatever work I'm doing, it's in close partnership with colleagues in China. So building these relationships and developing those partnerships is a big part of the work as well.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So we just watched some incredible footage, some of which is from 1972 when the pandas first arrived. I'm curious, can you both or one of you talk about how has the program changed since the 1970s?
Well, I can talk about the animal care side of the change. A lot has changed, actually. And I worked with Xing when I first started. So even just between Xing and these pandas coming, their diets are different. The amount of bamboo we feed is different. The enrichment that we give them, or the toys that you might say that we give them a lot of objects to manipulate and change their habitat around. And speaking of habitat, you probably noticed in the video, there's just a lot of grass, not a lot of trees or things. And you look at our exhibits now, we tried to make them a little more naturalistic. They have trees that they can climb. They have pools to go in. They have caves that they can go in that are actually air conditioned. And then things like the training, that's a really big one that we have that we didn't used to do with Xing, is we do a lot of medical training where we can get blood work, blood pressure, ultrasounds, and all those important things from the pandas without actually putting them under anesthesia. So they go into a special training area that's a safe place where we're safe and they're safe, and then they voluntarily participate in these kind of things. So that's actually a really big one that we didn't have back when we had Ling Ling and Xing. So and then obviously we learned how to care for cubs, because we actually have been very successful with that. So
wonderful.
So for me, I wasn't around in the 70s, but my first trip to China was in 2001. And you think about even back then, it was quite different in terms of where we were with our, it was very new, developing new partners and meeting people in China and learning how to work together has changed a lot. If you think about the gift of the pandas, that was related to the first U.S. president going to China in 1971 or 2, and that the gift was a thank you for coming. And that it's just the relationship with China has really changed a lot, and it's so for me that's kind of what I've seen in terms of like the country opening up and being able to travel and work with people has been, and the technology there and capacity has in 20 years has changed a great deal. And our relationship with China, the National Zoo and the organizations that we work with there has been a really huge success. So that's that's something that I've enjoyed watching and being a part of.
And Mel, you talked about going first to China in 2001, or your first trip was 2001. Can you both talk about the context in which with the pandas arriving in 2000 and what that dynamic was like?
Yeah, Lori, you that.
Obviously, it was quite a big deal. We had sent researchers over and to kind of get to know the pandas before they actually came. And then we sent some keepers over to also get to know them and sort of bond with them before they came to the US. And then when they got here, they had some familiar faces. Obviously, once they got here, it was a very big deal. I think that one of the biggest things that we did when they came that has made the biggest difference is our webcams. We didn't have that obviously before that. And when we started our program with the webcams, it opened up pandas to millions of people that would maybe never see a panda. And it's just, from then on, people have been able to watch their everyday activities, and they've even been able to see births of cubs. And then of course, cubs growing up on, that they may never actually see in person, but it's made a huge impact, I think, just for people loving pandas.
And Lori, while I have you, can you talk about your experience with the pandas and what it's like to work with them?
Well, it's great to work with pandas. I can't complain. It's not an easy job. There's a lot of fanfare around pandas, and it's at times it can be very stressful. Breeding and birth season obviously are very stressful, and our families don't get to see us during that time. But just day to day, it's really nice to be able to get to know an animal that is so rare. I get to see their personalities and how they differ, and just kind of know what they like and what they don't like, and that helps me to better care for them. And just to see them grow and see Meishan become a mom and raise all these great cubs that have been so much fun to watch. And then don't forget about Tien, because he's awesome too. It's a great job. I can't complain.
It sounds, and from the videos, it looks like a pretty cool job. Mel, can you tell us a little bit about what role conservation has played in the panda program at the zoo?
Well, when we first got there, but we got Meishan and Chen, conservation was a priority from the beginning. It actually is mandated as part of our having a permit to have the giant pandas, which helps, but it's always, I think, a priority when we have a species here that we're also working on the conservation. And I think more broadly, I think we've seen giant pandas in conservation it's been a huge success story. If you think about how it's been able to move from endangered to vulnerable status, I think that kind of says it all in terms of what's been possible in terms of conservation of the wild pandas.
And before we get into some questions from our audience today, I'd like to ask, what do you see as the role and impact of the panda program at the zoo? It's a question for both of you.
I mean, I think from our end at the zoo, just hoping that people will have a love for pandas. And obviously, when you love pandas, you're interested in saving them. And I think, like Mel said before, they're an umbrella species for their habitat. So people that are trying to save pandas are saving a lot of species that live with pandas. But it's a successful program, and potentially could be used maybe for other species as a model because it's been so successful. But hopefully people will get to see the pandas. But if not, they can certainly get to watch them on the webcam and enjoy them at the zoo.
Wonderful.
I would say I think of pandas as kind of like you hear about an entryway drug. They're kind of an entryway species. So people get really excited about pandas, and then they start to learn about pandas, and then they start to learn about their ecology, and hopefully become interested in ecology and conservation more generally. And that's not always the case, but I do think it is a great hook for education, for getting people inspired, and hopefully inspired to action in terms of conservation and other ways to support the pandas and hopefully in nature and other species as well.
Great. And now I think we're going to turn to some questions we've gotten from our audience today. And the first question is, now none of us were here in 1972, but why were the original two pandas kept apart, as we saw in that first video?
I suspect that our Chinese colleagues probably told them to keep them apart until they were old enough to breed. Pandas are technically solitary animals. Obviously, the younger ones will play together, but we used to manage our pandas together for part of the day when they were younger. But you find that once they're at breeding age, or once Meishang had her first cub, that doesn't work anymore, and we keep them separate now because they would definitely fight if that were the case. But probably back then, that's just the way they did it.
And then our next question came in via email. So how does Xiao Qiji compare to his siblings in terms of their temperament/personalities, their development in relationship with Meishang?
I would say that he is very much like Meishang. He probably is, well, Bebe was our largest cub and no one ever caught up to him. So he's kind of probably the second largest cub as far as, growth and development. And probably we're finding maybe the most like Meishang, just a little bit more careful about how he goes through life, like his mom. Personality wise, usually the boys are a little bit more laid back. We've only had one female, but she was very independent and really not as interested in interacting as much. But he's a joy. He's really, really sweet.
And another question for you, Lori. This person asked also from via email is, what does Lori think has been the biggest thing learned from the pandas in the time since Meishang and Tian Tian have been at the zoo and since Taishan was born 16 years ago?
Probably the biggest thing I've learned is that you can't predict anything with pandas. When we try to predict, especially with Meishang, breeding and giving birth and all that, whenever we try to predict what will happen the next time, she just does something completely different. So we know that we just don't know everything about pandas, and there's still a lot more to learn.
And while we wait for, I guess, if anyone has any more questions, please pop them in the Q&A box or the chat. But I'd like to know, for both of you, can you both tell me about the first time you interacted with the pandas at the zoo and what you left after that first interaction?
Gosh, I can't even remember. It would have been with Xing. Obviously, he left a good impression. He was a very, very sweet guy, and he was older when I first met him, but very charming and very interested in interacting with his keepers. So, at the time I was working also with primates, and when there came a time where I could choose one or the other, I actually, because of Xing, I went with pandas because I just thought there was just something amazing about pandas and there was so much to learn about them. So he inspired me, I guess.
And I unfortunately don't get to interact with pandas. In the wild, they're very elusive. So I've never seen one in the wild. I did get to hold one when I talked about doing that course at Wolong, and as a thank you, they let me hold a 4-month-old cub, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, so we use camera traps and things like that and look at their poop and their feeding signs. That's as close as we get to them in the wild.
And we have another question here. Is there a plan to continue the panda program after the current contract expires, meaning having pandas at the zoo?
Yes, we would love to continue the panda program. The pair that we have now, Meishong and Shenshan, will go back in 2023. And we hope to get a new pair sometime after that. But the timing and all of that has to be worked out. But we hope to always have pandas at the National Zoo.
Okay, and another one we have is, can you say more about how and why the diet of the pandas at the zoo has changed from the first pandas until now?
So when I worked with Qinling, we actually fed him a like a rice gruel, where we added a bunch of like vitamins and minerals in there, and then it was like rice with some warm water. We did that when Qinling was alive, and then when the new pandas came, we had the leaf eater biscuits. That is a commercial zoo feed that has vitamins and minerals in there already. So we started feeding the biscuits instead of the rice. And he also got apples and carrots, so that stayed similar. And then as far as the bamboo, we feed quite a bit more now than we did back then. And we have obviously quite a bit more sites and varieties that we did, so.
Wonderful. And for Mel, we have a question. Would you mind talking a little bit more about reintroduction efforts?
Sure. So there are two breeding centers in China, and both have initiated different reintroduction programs. They have a little bit different approaches, and so the Chengdu research base, they focus on training. They train pretty closely with a human to get familiar, so that the pandas are familiar with a person, and that the idea being that they can go and be able to approach the pandas once they've been released. And then the Wulong Center also has a program where they have a much more hands-off and try to stay away from the pandas and keep them as unfamiliar with people as they can. So there's kind of a couple different approaches that are going on. And so and when they're released, they are collared, so they're tracked, and so they can find out what happens with them. So it's so it's pretty exciting. I think it really is a testament to how successful they've been with the breeding programs to get to the point where they feel confident about releasing some of the captive animals back to bolster the wild population. So it's exciting.
Great. And I think for maybe one of our last questions, we got a question in the Q&A box that says, will you conduct tool use study with Xiaoji? And if you can maybe explain what tool use is for some of us who don't know.
We did attempt a tool use study with the adults and with Bebe, and it was not successful. So we probably won't repeat that with him. We'd have to I think we need to find the right tool use approach. It involved the pandas having to stand up on something and reach for something that was high up. And we've realized that pandas don't generally like to stand up on those things to get them. So it wasn't successful. So we'd have to go back to the drawing board and design something else.
And a follow-up for you, Mel. Do you know how many pandas have been released into the wild to date?
I don't know exactly how many.
And then probably not a fair question for you, Lori, but we have someone who wants to know, do you have a favorite panda?
I do, actually. Tian Tian will always be my favorite. I'm not afraid to admit that. He's just adorable, and I'm just he's just, I don't know, there's just something about him that I just adore, and he's a goofball, and he's very straightforward. He tells you when he wants something. And he's just a really cool guy. So he'll always be my favorite.
And I think on that note, I will pass it back over to our Master of Ceremonies, Kira Soberg. Thank you both so much for sharing with me. I really appreciate your time.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I echo Hannah's thanks, and Hannah, thank you for asking the questions and stuff. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was fun, and we hope that you will join us for our next film fest in the series next month. Have a great night.